Hello, friends. So, the tariffs imposed on Canada and Mexico by Donald Trump have finally arrived. Effective today, President Trump has imposed 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico. In the wake of Trump's threat of imposing 25% tariff on Canadian goods, it is important to remove interprovincial trade barriers in Canada to handle the threat effectively. In light of external trade tensions, there has been a renewed focus on addressing internal trade barriers. A 2016 study by the International Monetary Fund estimated that removing interprovincial trade barriers could boost Canada's GDP by up to 4%, highlighting the potential economic gains of enhanced internal trade. Removing interprovincial trade barriers is a strategic economic defense against potential Trump tariffs. It would, first of all, reduce reliance on the US by strengthening domestic markets. Secondly, it would lower business costs, helping firms stay competitive. For example, interprovincial trade barriers add 88% to 14.5% to the price of goods and services within Canada. And thirdly, improve supply chain resilience by encouraging domestic sourcing. And also enhance labor mobility, ensuring workers can move where needed. It would also increase Canada's bargaining power in trade negotiations. Now let's look first of all at the key interprovincial agreements which exist as of today. The first one is Canadian Free Trade Agreement CFTA 2017. Yes, Canada has multiple interprovincial trade agreements, but barriers still exist, especially in alcohol distribution, agriculture supply management, trucking regulations, and professional licensing. The CFTA is the most comprehensive agreement, but regional agreements like NWPTA, ATPA, and the Ontario Quebec TCA provide stronger trade liberalization in certain areas. However, full internal trade freedom is still a work in progress. So, the CFTA is a nation-wide agreement among all provinces, territories, and the federal government. Some sectors, for example, alcohol, dairy, trucking regulations, still have exemptions. Now let's look at the another key interprovincial agreement. It's New West Partnership Trade Agreement or NWPTA 2010. Its members include British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. It is more comprehensive and binding than the CFTA. It has stronger labor mobility provisions, making it easier for professionals to work across provinces. And the third one is Atlantic Trade and Procurement Agreement or ATPA 2015. Its members are New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and Labrador. It reduces trade barriers and harmonizes procurement rules for government contracts. It does not fully remove regulatory and licensing differences across provinces. And finally, the Ontario Quebec Trade and Cooperation Agreement or TCA 2009. It's a bilateral agreement between Ontario and Quebec, India's two largest, I beg your pardon, Canada's two largest economies. Its focus areas are energy cooperation, labor mobility, and regulatory harmonization in key industries. Some sectors, like alcohol and agriculture, still have restrictions. So now let's look at the existing trade barriers in different fields. The first one is supply management in dairy and poultry sectors. Canada employs a supply management system for its dairy and poultry industries, which involves production quotas and pricing mechanisms to stabilize the market. Critics argue that this system imposes strict limits on interprovincial shipments, thereby restricting the free flow of these products across provincial borders. For example, provincial dairy marketing boards control and limit the sale of dairy products, setting production quotas, and imposing strict limits on interprovincial shipments. And the second one, regulatory differences across provinces. So each Canadian province has the authority to establish its own regulations and standards for various industries. These differences can create obstacles for businesses aiming to operate nationally. For instance, variations in transportation regulations, such as differing weight and dimension limits for trucks, can complicate logistics and increase costs for companies moving goods interprovincially. And now let's look at alcohol distribution and sales restriction. This is another area in which trade barriers still exist. The distribution and sale of alcoholic beverages are heavily regulated at the provincial level, leading to challenges in interprovincial trade. Some provinces maintain monopolies over alcohol sales, and regulations can restrict the importation of alcohol from other provinces. This fragmentation hinders the creation of a unified national market for alcohol products. And now let's look at the other field where there are existing trade barriers. It is in the field of professional certification and licensing. Professionals such as engineers, nurses, and teachers must often obtain certification or licensing specific to each province. This requirement can deter professionals from offering their services across provincial lines, limiting labor mobility and the efficient allocation of skilled workers. Now let's look at the economic impact of interprovincial trade barriers. Interprovincial trade barrier interprovincial trade is a vital component of Canada's economy, with internal trade accounting for approximately 20% of nation's GDP, translating to over $1 billion in daily transactions. The presence of interprovincial trade barriers imposes significant costs on the Canadian economy. First is in the field of price increases. These barriers can add between 8% and 14.5% to the prices of goods and services across Canada. And there are productivity losses as well. Barriers to trade and labor mobility contribute to slower productivity growth due to missed economies of scale and scope. And now let's look at potential benefits of removing trade barriers. Eliminating these trade barriers or obstacles could yield substantial economic advantages. As mentioned earlier, estimates suggest that removing interprovincial trade barriers could boost Canada's GDP by approximately 3.8% or 4%. And there could be cost savings as well. Such measures could result in annual savings of around $32 billion. Per capita benefits, implementing mutual recognition policies for goods and services across provinces could enhance the economy by $2,900 to $5,100 per person. Addressing and eliminating interprovincial trade barriers presents a significant opportunity to enhance economic efficiency, reduce costs for consumers and businesses, and strengthen Canada's economic resilience. So, if you like the presentation, please do subscribe and like our channel. Thank you very much.